My name is Caitlin Monroe, and I'm 27 years old. I used to think I was just the black sheep of my family. The moody one, the problem child, the one who never quite fit into my mother's carefully curated image of perfection. But everything changed the night the fire broke out. That was the night I stopped trying to make sense of the silence of the unequal love of the secrets. That was the night my sister locked my bedroom door from the outside while smoke filled the hallway. And my mother laughed. I remember the exact sound of it, high-pitched, cold, detached, like she was watching a movie, not watching her own daughter scream for help. The fire started in the kitchen. I smelled it before I saw it. One moment I was lying on my bed, scrolling mindlessly through messages. The next, my nose stung with that acrid scent of burning grease. I jumped up and ran to my door, but when I turned the handle, it didn't budge. Confused, I twisted harder. Still nothing. Then I saw it. The small latch at the top of the door had been fastened from the outside. That latch was never used. Never! I yelled for help, pounding on the door. Jessica. Mom. Anybody. Something's burning. The house is on fire. I'm locked in. Nothing. For a few seconds, I thought maybe they hadn't heard me. Maybe they were asleep. But then I heard the sound I will never forget as long as I live. Laughter. My mother's voice right outside the door. I froze. She said something muffled. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard this part clear as day. She's always been dramatic. Let her scream. Then Jessica's voice followed. Calm. Almost bored. I told you she'd panic. It's just smoke. We'll open the door when she learns to shut up. And then I realized. They weren't planning to open the door. They weren't worried. They weren't rushing to help me. They had locked me in. On purpose. Smoke had started to creep in under the door. My throat tightened. I backed away, coughing, trying to breathe through my sleeve. My windows were old, painted shut years ago. I'd tried opening them before and given up. No fire escape. No ladder. My phone. I scrambled to the closet, yanked open a box of old shoes. Hidden beneath the insole of a left boot was my backup phone. I'd kept it there in secret for months, ever since I'd moved back in and started to feel the old pattern of control returning. The battery was at 38%. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost surreal against the chaos I was living. 911, what's your emergency? There's a fire. I'm trapped. 302 Bennett Street. Back bedroom. I'm locked in. My sister locked the door. My mom won't help. Please, please, hurry. I heard myself say things I didn't even know I was ready to admit. They locked me in. They want me to burn. That was the first time I said it out loud, and the truth of it hit me like the heat from the growing flames. I wasn't just overreacting. I wasn't just sensitive. I was in real danger, and the people who were supposed to protect me had made sure of it. I dropped to the floor, remembering what they taught us in school about staying low in smoke. The air was clearer near the ground, but not by much. My lungs ached. My eyes burned. My hands trembled as I held the phone to my ear. Please, don't hang up. Stay with me. I can't breathe. The dispatcher kept talking, kept assuring me help was on the way. I crawled to the window, tried again to pry it open. It didn't move. I threw a book at it. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. Then I saw lights flashing outside. Sirens. The dispatcher said they're there. They see you. Hang on. I banged on the window with everything I had left. And as the smoke closed in, I remember one thought repeating in my head. They locked me in. My own family. They wanted me gone, and I finally believed it. From the outside, we were the picture of suburban perfection, the Monroe women. That's what neighbors called us. My mother, Deborah, was a middle school teacher who always wore floral dresses and pearls, never raised her voice in public, and organized every single bake sale with military precision. She had this aura of authority disguised as kindness, the kind of person people trusted on sight. My older sister, Jessica. She was the golden child. Beautiful, poised valedictorian cheer captain. Everyone loved Jessica. The girls wanted to be her, the boys wanted to date her, and me, I was Caitlin, the younger one, the quiet one, the one who didn't smile in pictures and always had her nose in a book. I didn't match the aesthetic, but still people assumed we were close. They'd say, "You're so lucky to have a strong mom like Deborah. She raised two great girls after your dad passed. What a role model." I used to nod and smile because correcting them would be exhausting. Besides, what could I say? Actually, my mom emotionally manipulates me, and my sister makes my life a living hell. That wouldn't go over well at the church picnic. The truth was, after my dad died in a car crash when I was 5, the house got colder. Not physically, but emotionally. My mother stopped smiling at home. She started enforcing rules with an iron fist, and Jessica changed too. She learned how to perform for approval, how to weaponize sweetness. She learned early that the fastest path to survival in our house was to become exactly what Mom wanted. And I didn't. So I became the problem. Every holiday, every church gathering, every dinner party, we played our roles. I'd be seated in the corner with a too-tight dress and a forced smile while Mom and Jessica told stories that erased me entirely. When people asked what I was into, my mom would jump in before I could speak. "Caitlin's very creative, but we're working on her attitude. She's sensitive, you know." I didn't even realize how carefully the image was curated until I got older. Looking back, I can see how every element of our family's presentation was rehearsed. From the matching outfits at Easter to the perfectly decorated Christmas tree that I wasn't allowed to touch. It wasn't about celebration, it was about control. Even our house was designed to impress. A white picket fence, flower beds in full bloom, wind chimes that sang in harmony. But inside, it was suffocating. I had a curfew until I was 17. Jessica didn't. I had to show my homework every night. Jessica didn't. I wasn't allowed to sleep over at friends' houses. Jessica had boys over and my mom just smiled. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I stayed silent, I was cold. There was no version of me that was acceptable. My room was the only place I could be alone, and even that space had rules. No posters, no locking the door, no closed windows. Once, when I tried to rearrange the furniture, my mother made me put it back within the hour. She told me control creates safety, but it never felt safe. It felt like I was constantly being watched, measured, and found lacking. There were times I wondered if maybe there was something wrong with me. Why couldn't I just behave the way they wanted? Why did Jessica float through the world so effortlessly while I felt like I was drowning? But no one ever saw the way my mother's smile disappeared the second the front door closed, or how Jessica's voice could turn into a blade behind closed doors. They only saw what they were meant to see: a perfect family, perfect daughters, perfect lies. I was 7 when I first understood that my life came with a script. My mother handed it to me without using words, but I read it clearly in her eyes, her posture, and her sharp corrections. She didn't tolerate improvisation. One morning before 2nd grade, I tried to choose my own outfit. It was a pair of jeans and a purple t-shirt with a cartoon star on it. My mother saw me walking down the stairs and froze. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She said, "Change. That shirt makes you look like a boy." Then she laid out a pink dress and white sandals and watched me put them on in silence. From that day forward, I stopped choosing. I waited for the clothes to be laid out. I let her brush my hair into tight braids that made my scalp ache. I sat up straight at the breakfast table and ate my eggs in silence because chewing too loudly was considered rude. I was 10 when I asked if I could join the school's art club. Jessica was already doing cheerleading and debate, and I wanted something for myself. My mother shook her head before I even finished the sentence. "Art club is messy. It's not for girls who want to be taken seriously." That was the first time I saw her mask slip just slightly. The disappointment in her eyes cut deeper than any slap. I learned fast. Clean hands, clean room, clean answers. Anything outside of her narrow expectations became a liability. Playdates were orchestrated like interviews. She would speak to the other parents in hushed tones, always steering the conversation toward their politics, religion, and family values. If someone didn't pass her test, they disappeared from my life. I lost friends without explanation. I started to lie about how well I was doing. Even when my stomach hurt every morning before school, even when I cried at night into my pillow, I told the world I was fine. Jessica never had those problems. She knew how to be the mirror my mother needed. She complimented her. She dressed the part. She smiled on command. And when no one was looking, she'd lean in close and whisper, "Just try harder, Caitlin. Maybe then Mom will love you too." I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think they'd believe me. How do you explain emotional abuse when there are no bruises? Only silence. I once tried to talk to a teacher in 5th grade after she noticed I didn't want to go home. I told her my mom gets angry a lot, and sometimes Jessica is mean. She smiled sympathetically and said, "Oh, honey, siblings fight, and your mom's just trying her best." I stopped talking after that. I kept everything inside. The rules became routine. No closed doors unless I was using the bathroom. No phone after 8. No saying no to family events. I wasn't allowed to argue. If I did, I was punished with chores with silence or with backhanded prayers at dinner, like, "Lord, please help Caitlin find her gratitude." Our family photo albums show smiling faces in color-coordinated outfits. You'd never guess I was dying inside those pictures, that I had to practice my smile in the mirror to make sure it looked real, that I felt like a guest in my own house. My mother used to say, "You'll thank me one day." The world is hard and I'm preparing you. But what she never admitted was that she wasn't preparing me for the world. She was preparing me for obedience. I was being trained to serve a system she built, one where love was conditional control, was care, and Jessica was queen. And in that system, I never had a voice. I was 13 when I first realized that in my mother's eyes, I wasn't just difficult, I was defective. It started with an argument over dinner. Jessica had knocked over my glass of milk and then blamed me as she always did. I protested. I said she lied. My mother's fork hit the table so hard it rattled the salt shaker. "Caitlin, enough," she snapped. "Your attitude is exhausting." Jessica said nothing. She didn't have to. She leaned back in her chair with that smug little smirk she wore like armor watching me get torn apart. I thought it would blow over. It didn't. The next morning, my mother said we were going to the doctor. No explanation. I assumed it was a routine checkup. Instead, I found myself sitting across from a woman in a cardigan who asked me to draw how I felt when I got angry. I was confused. I thought we were here for a physical. My mother sat beside me and answered every question before I could. "She's been emotional, difficult. She lashes out. She's withdrawn. It's been going on for a while." I wanted to scream that none of it was true. That I didn't lash out, I just wanted to be heard. But I sat there in silence because I knew how this worked. If I said too much, I'd prove her point. At the end of the appointment, the woman nodded solemnly and handed my mother a brochure. She used the word mood disorder. She said I might benefit from medication. That night, there was a small white pill on my dinner plate next to the green beans. My mother watched me swallow it. "It's to help you," she said. "To keep the storm inside you quiet." I took the pill because I was too scared not to. The next morning, my head felt foggy. My thoughts moved like molasses. In class, I couldn't focus. At home, I felt detached from my own skin. It was like being underwater. My grades dropped. Teachers who once praised me started asking if something was wrong. My mother had already prepared for that. She told them I was struggling with emotional regulation. She said the medication was an adjustment. Jessica chimed in at school. She told kids I had episodes, that I was on pills to keep me from losing it. And somehow everyone believed them, even people I thought were my friends. I tried once to explain to Maya, the girl who sat next to me in English class. I told her I wasn't crazy, that my family just didn't like when I pushed back. She looked unsure. I think she wanted to believe me, but she also knew my mother everyone did. "Ms. Monroe is amazing." That's what teachers said. "You're so lucky to have her." No one saw the way she cornered me in the hallway after school and hissed, "If you make me look bad, Caitlin, I swear to God you'll regret it." That year, I wasn't allowed to go on the 8th grade field trip. My mother said I wasn't emotionally stable enough to be trusted away from home. I spent that weekend cleaning the garage and writing essays about gratitude. The pills kept coming. Different sizes, different colors. Some made me sleepy. Some gave me headaches. I wasn't told what they were. I wasn't even allowed to ask. It's for your own good, my mother said. You don't understand how scary you can be when you're not managed. I began to question my own memories. Maybe I did overreact. Maybe I was broken. Maybe they were right. That was the most dangerous part. Not the pills, not the isolation, but the slow erosion of my belief in myself. That's how gaslighting works. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It rewrites reality until you doubt your own mind, until you take the pill and say thank you, until you stop fighting, until you become what they said you were all along. It wasn't until I met Maya that I realized how dark my world had become. We were both 16 and placed together in an advanced art class. It was one of the few electives my mother allowed under the condition that I never stay late and never bring home messy projects. Maya sat next to me, her sketchbook already covered in bright colors and wild shapes. She introduced herself the first day without hesitation, grinning like she'd already decided we'd be friends. I hadn't spoken to anyone in class beyond surface-level greetings in years. But something about Maya felt different. She didn't seem afraid of saying the wrong thing. She laughed at herself. She asked questions without judging the answers. The first real conversation we had happened after she noticed the drawing I was working on. I'd drawn a girl sitting inside a bird cage, the bars bending outward as if she'd tried to push them open. Maya didn't say anything at first. Then, after a long moment, she leaned in and said, "That's not just a drawing, is it?" I didn't respond. Couldn't. No one had ever looked at something I made and actually seen me. She didn't push. She just nodded and said, "I get it. I know what it's like to feel trapped." Over the next few weeks, we talked more. At lunch, during class, sometimes even after school, when we'd walk to the library together. I was careful not to tell her too much. My mother had rules about who I could talk to, and Jessica had a way of finding things out. But little by little, I let pieces slip. How I had to take pills I didn't understand. How I wasn't allowed to have a lock on my door. How my mother monitored my phone. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't look shocked or pitying. Instead, she looked furious on my behalf. "That's not normal, Caitlin," she said. "That's not protection. That's control. That's abuse." I'd never heard someone say it so plainly. The word abuse had always seemed too big, too dramatic, like something that happened in other people's lives. But when Maya said it, it made something in me click. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't broken. I was being hurt. One afternoon, we sat under the oak tree behind the school, and she asked if I ever thought about leaving. Just walking away. I told her I didn't even know how, that I had no money, no support, no backup plan. She squeezed my hand and said, "If you ever need help, I'm here." And I believed her. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. But that kind of freedom, even the hint of it, didn't go unnoticed. Jessica saw us talking one day. She cornered me in the hallway later and said, "Mom's not going to like your new little project. You know how she feels about outsiders." The warning hit hard. I tried to keep my distance after that, afraid of what might happen. But the damage was done. My mother started questioning me about Maya, asking where I was going, who I was texting. She called Maya's parents and told them I was emotionally unstable and fixated on their daughter. Within a week, Maya told me her parents had banned her from spending time with me. She cried when she said it. I did too. That night, I sat in my room staring at the walls and realized just how small my world still was. Maya had opened a door just a crack, and even though it slammed shut again, I'd seen the light on the other side, and I wasn't going to forget it. After Maya was taken from me, something hardened inside. I stopped trying to win my mother's approval. I stopped hoping Jessica would ever defend me. Instead, I began planning. Not loudly, not with declarations or threats. Quietly, deliberately. If I couldn't walk out the front door, I'd build an exit of my own. It started with waking up earlier than everyone else. I'd sit on the edge of my bed in the dark, listening to the house breathe, learning its rhythms. I knew which floorboards creaked. I knew which windows groaned if touched too quickly. I learned how long it took my mother to get from the kitchen to the upstairs hallway and exactly how far I could go before I was noticed. I began hiding small amounts of money, loose change from grocery errands, A $10 bill slipped into the back pocket of a pair of jeans. I opened a library card in my name and used it to access computers. From there, I researched shelters, legal rights, what options existed for someone in my position. Everything I learned I wrote down on tiny scraps of paper that I folded and slid into a hollowed-out paperback novel I kept on my bookshelf. Jessica never touched my books. She said reading made her sleepy. I created a second email address. I applied for online gigs, small ones at first, logo designs, flyer layouts. I told my mother the extra time on the computer was for school. She believed it because it was easier than suspecting the truth. Over time, I built a small income. Not enough to move out, not yet, but enough to imagine the possibility. Enough to feel the edges of freedom. I bought a prepaid phone with my first real payment. It was nothing fancy, just a basic flip phone, but it represented a lifeline. I memorized the number and then hid it beneath the insert of my left boot. I carried it with me like a secret weapon. The medication was harder. I couldn't stop taking it all at once. My mother watched too closely. So I began faking it. Hiding pills under my tongue, spitting them out later, flushing them down the toilet when I was alone. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. The fog in my brain lifted. I began remembering things more clearly. Conversations, patterns, all the little ways they had tried to convince me I was unwell. I wrote it all down. A log of truth documented for myself so I wouldn't forget. The more I wrote, the angrier I became. Not loud anger, but quiet, directed rage. It kept me focused. Every time Jessica called me a freak under her breath, I wrote it down. Every time my mother told me no one would ever love someone like me, I documented it. The pages filled up fast. Sometimes I'd reread them and feel like I was looking at someone else's life. But it was mine. It had always been mine. There were moments I almost gave up. Nights when the fear crept in, whispering that I'd never get out. But then I'd remember Maya's words. If you ever need help, I'm here. She couldn't be with me anymore, but the echo of her belief kept me moving. I started to dress differently, nothing too obvious, just slightly out of line with what my mother picked. I adjusted my tone. I stopped apologizing for everything. And when they noticed when my mother's mouth tightened and Jessica's eyes narrowed, I smiled. Because they could sense it. They didn't know what yet, but they felt it. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't playing their game anymore. I was writing my own rules. And I was getting ready to leave. I was 20 when I decided to finally say no. Not with rolled eyes or muttered sarcasm, but a clear, deliberate no. That year, my mother insisted I apply to Evermore College, the same small religious university Jessica had attended, where she had graduated with honors and a fiancé from a wealthy family. My mother called it tradition. She said it was our legacy. I said it felt like a prison. I had already been accepted to a state school 2 hours away with a full scholarship for digital media, something I had applied for on my own without telling anyone. When I revealed the offer at the dinner table, Jessica laughed out loud, and my mother went silent for a full minute before setting down her fork like a judge about to deliver a sentence. That's not happening, she said. You'll go to Evermore or you won't go at all. My hands were shaking, but I looked her in the eye and said I'm going. Her lips curled into a smile that never touched her eyes. Then you won't have a home to come back to. I packed my bags that night. Jessica called me selfish and dramatic, just like always, and told me not to come crying when I realized no one else would put up with me. I moved into a rundown studio apartment near campus, using the money I had saved from freelance work and a little help from the scholarship housing stipend. It was barely furnished, drafty in the winter, and I had to use headphones at night to block out the neighbors' arguments, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I could close my door and lock it. I could open the windows whenever I wanted. I didn't have to ask permission to breathe. Maya reached out when she heard I had left. She was at another university across the state and had seen a social media post from someone back home. Her message was simple. I'm proud of you. That was all I needed to hear. For 6 glorious months, I lived in a strange mix of fear and freedom. I kept my phone on silent in case my mother called. I never answered the door without looking through the peephole. But I also painted my own walls. I stayed up late watching movies. I walked outside at midnight just because I could. It didn't last. I should have known they wouldn't let me go so easily. One day, I came home to find my front door wide open. My mother sat calmly on the couch, flipping through my sketchbook. Jessica stood by the kitchen, arms folded like a warden. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking. My mother stood up, walked over, and placed a hand on my cheek. "You need help," she said. "We've already spoken to the school. They know you're going through a mental episode. You're coming home." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was insane. "You broke into my apartment." Jessica held up a copy of my lease. "You used my name as a reference. That makes us co-signers. This is still technically family property. You have no rights here." That wasn't true, but they said it like it was. They were so used to bending reality that even I had to pause and check myself. I told them to leave. I called campus security. They left, but not before my mother whispered, "You think you've escaped, Caitlin. You think you're free. You have no idea what we're willing to do." That night, I slept with a chair against the door, and I started planning again, because I had escaped once, and I'd do it better next time. Jessica called me on a rainy Tuesday evening, her voice honey-sweet and dripping with familiarity I hadn't heard in years. "Hey, little sis, I've been thinking about you." At first, I thought it was a mistake, that maybe she'd dialed me accidentally. But she kept talking, asking how school was going, saying she missed me, that things at home were calmer now that Mom had changed. She said they were planning a small dinner for Mom's birthday, and it would mean the world if I came. Just dinner, she promised. Just family. For a moment, I hesitated. My gut screamed no, but something else tugged at me, a twisted longing to believe her. Jessica had always known how to say the right thing, how to press the soft spots I tried to keep hidden. She talked about old times, about how maybe we could start fresh. Maybe things could be different. She said she understood now how hard it must have been for me growing up. I wanted to believe her, not because she earned it, but because I was tired. Tired of being at war. Tired of always being the outsider. Maya warned me against it the moment I told her. She said, "This smells like a setup, Caitlin," but I waved it off. Maybe it was naive, but I hoped for some kind of peace, some closure. I told myself I'd go for just 1 hour, keep my guard up and leave before anything could go wrong. I arrived with a small gift, nothing sentimental, just a book of poetry I thought Mom might like even if she never read it. The house looked exactly the same down to the red front door and the flower pots on the steps. But it felt colder. Jessica greeted me with a hug that felt too tight, too long. Mom emerged from the kitchen, all smiles and soft tones. "Oh, Caitlin, it's so good to see you." She acted like nothing had happened, like I hadn't walked away from years of silence and manipulation. Dinner was quiet, unnaturally so. No arguments, no tension. Just 2 perfect smiles and food that tasted like nothing. I should have known then. I should have seen it coming. But I was so busy trying to believe that maybe, just maybe they wanted to heal, that I didn't notice the small things, the new lock on the hallway door, the faint smell of gas near the stove, the way Jessica's eyes darted every time I stood up to leave the table. I told them I had to go. My mother's face twisted for a second, just a flicker of annoyance. Jessica said, "Just stay the night. The storm's bad." I declined. I walked upstairs to grab my coat and phone from the guest room where I'd left them. That's when I heard the click behind me. I turned just in time to hear the lock slide into place. The door didn't open. I tried again. Then I heard them. My mother's voice, calm and cold. Let her scream. She always does. And Jessica just outside the door whispering, "You should have stayed gone." Then came the smell. Smoke. And I realized this wasn't a reunion. It was revenge. The smoke hit my lungs before the full horror hit my brain. It was subtle at first, a bitter hint in the air like something overcooked in the oven. But it got stronger fast, turning sharp and thick, coating the inside of my throat like poison. I stumbled toward the door and yanked the handle again. Nothing. It was locked tight. I slammed my palm against it. "Jessica! Mom! The stove is on. Something's burning. Let me out." I heard movement on the other side, slow, deliberate. Then silence. A silence so loud it made my skin crawl. My heart thundered in my chest. I ran to the window. old as ever, painted shut like every window in that house had been since I was a kid. The glass was cold, but the room was starting to warm. I could feel it in the floorboards and the air around my arms, a rising heat creeping toward me like a living thing. I grabbed the desk chair and threw it against the window. It cracked, but didn't break. I screamed for help. I banged on the walls. I pounded on the door until my hands went numb. No response. Just that awful, mocking silence. My phone. I had left it in my coat pocket hanging on the back of the bedroom door. I clawed it free, coughing now, my eyes streaming from the thickening haze. I unlocked it and called 911. My fingers trembled so hard I nearly hit the wrong number. When the dispatcher picked up, I gasped into the speaker. "There's a fire! I'm trapped. 302 Bennett Street. Upstairs bedroom. My mom and sister locked me in. I can't get out. I can't breathe. Please, help me. Please." My voice cracked the words, barely pushing past the smoke. I could hear the dispatcher typing. Her voice stayed calm, steady, even as I felt like I was dying. "We're sending someone now. Stay low. Find a cloth for your mouth if you can. You're doing great, Caitlin. Just hang on." She said my name. And I don't know why that detail stuck with me, but in that moment it felt like someone out there saw me as real. I dropped to the ground, crawling under the rising cloud of smoke. The carpet scorched my knees, but I kept moving. I found a towel in the closet, pressed it to my face, and tried to breathe. The fire hadn't reached the room yet, but I could hear it snapping and popping from somewhere below. The walls felt like they were vibrating. And then I heard footsteps. Not rushing, not frantic. Slow, heavy. A figure passed by the crack under the door. I screamed again. "Please, I'm still here. Let me out." The footsteps stopped. Then faintly, my mother's voice came through. "You always wanted attention, Caitlin. This is what it looks like." Then she walked away. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body was focused on survival. I crawled back to the window and pounded on it again. Through the cracked glass, I could see flashing lights. Red, blue, sirens blaring. Relief surged through me like electricity. They were here. I screamed, waving my arms, coughing so hard I thought I'd vomit. Someone shouted outside. Then glass shattered. A firefighter's masked face appeared eyes wide as he took in the blocked window. The smoke meat crumpled on the floor. He reached in and pulled me out, strong arms lifting me into cold, clean air. I sobbed, choking on oxygen. The firefighter shouted something I couldn't hear. Everything blurred. Faces swam around me. Oxygen masks, stretchers. A woman's voice screaming, "Is she okay? Is she breathing?" It was Maya. She had driven by on a late shift, seen the smoke, and recognized the house. She had followed the fire truck, shouting at the officers until they let her through. She grabbed my hand as they placed me into the ambulance. "You're safe now," she whispered. "They can't hurt you anymore." I don't remember the ride to the hospital. I don't remember the first night or the IVs or the tests, but I remember waking up 2 days later and asking one question: "Are they in jail?" The nurse nodded. The 911 call was enough to arrest them on the spot. And Maya, bless her, had told them everything. The fire hadn't just exposed their hatred, it had burned down their lies. For the first time, I wasn't the one no one believed. I was the survivor with proof. I was the girl they tried to silence. And I lived. The 911 recording changed everything. It wasn't just a piece of evidence. It was my voice captured at the exact moment my world split open. The recording played during the police investigation, during interviews, and eventually in court. And every single time it had the same effect, it silenced the room. Because you couldn't listen to that call and walk away thinking I was making it up. You couldn't hear the terror in my voice, the desperation, the clarity of my words. I'm locked in my mom and sister did this and still believe their version of events. The police started piecing together the scene almost immediately. The fire marshal determined the blaze had started in the kitchen, but no one had called it in. There were signs the stove had been left on deliberately with a flammable towel nearby. More damning was the lock on the bedroom door, installed from the outside and fresh. The screws were new, unpainted, obviously intended to seal someone in. Me. The officer assigned to my case, Detective Rayner, visited me in the hospital 3 days after I regained consciousness. He was older patient with kind eyes and a quiet voice. He didn't push me to talk right away. He just sat by my bed and said, "We found what we needed, Caitlin. You don't have to prove anything to us." I started crying the moment he said that. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life, someone believed me without needing me to bleed for it. Detective Rayner explained that both my mother and Jessica had been arrested the night of the fire. Jessica had been caught trying to drive away while firefighters were still on the scene. My mother had been standing in the yard watching it all burn, telling neighbors I'd lost control and started the fire myself. The neighbors hadn't believed her. Not this time. Not after hearing the things she said when she didn't know anyone was listening. One neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, told police she heard my mother say, "She'll finally learn her lesson." Another recalled Jessica laughing and calling it a wake-up call. They hadn't even tried to fake panic. The evidence mounted quickly. The fresh lock, the statements from Maya, the hospital records showing smoke inhalation, the recording. Always the recording. They nailed my windows shut in the past. This time they locked my door. And I told the dispatcher, "They want me to die." And somehow, hearing that truth come from my own mouth gave it power, more than any witness or report. My mother's lawyers claimed I had a long history of mental instability. They tried to admit old school records and therapy notes she had manipulated. They insisted that the fire was an accident and that I had hallucinated the rest. But the facts wouldn't bend to fit her story. My phone log showed the 911 call. The photos showed the lock. Maya brought journals I had shared with her documenting months of abuse. Even Jessica, under pressure, started to crack. She claimed she didn't know the fire would get that bad. She said she had just wanted to scare me, that she hadn't meant for me to get hurt. But intent didn't matter. She'd locked me in. She'd heard me scream. She'd walked away. And now the world knew it. Detective Rayner told me I would likely be called to testify in court. I nodded. I was scared. Of course I was. But I was also ready, because I had something more powerful than fear. I had the truth, and this time I had a voice the world could finally hear. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, pale walls, a faint echo that made every footstep feel louder than it should have. I sat at the front beside Julia Winters, the prosecutor assigned to my case. She was sharp composed and had spent hours prepping me for what was to come. But no matter how many times we reviewed the timeline, nothing could have prepared me for the moment I saw my mother and Jessica enter in handcuffs. Jessica looked down, her expression tight with restrained embarrassment. But my mother, she looked straight at me, not angry, not remorseful, just annoyed. Like I was an inconvenience she had hoped to never deal with again. Part of me expected her to cry, to pretend to beg for sympathy like she always did when backed into a corner. But she didn't. She simply sat, crossed her legs, and waited. The trial was scheduled for 3 weeks, but even by day 3 the tone was set. Julia presented the 911 call first. She let the jury hear it without introduction. Just played it. My voice filled the room raw and terrified, reporting my mother and sister. I heard the same gasps I'd heard from detectives and social workers. One juror visibly flinched when I screamed on the recording. Another wiped tears. That moment changed everything. The prosecution called firefighters who had responded that night. They described the smoke density, the locked door, the way I had to be pulled from a second-story window because there was no other escape. One officer said, "We weren't expecting to find someone alive in there." The heat had already begun to buckle the floorboards. Then came Maya. She stood on the witness stand and spoke with calm, deliberate truth. She talked about the journals I had shared with her, the drawings, the whispered calls late at night. She told them how she had tried to intervene when we were 16, how my mother had spun lies to keep her away. She said I always knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. She brought evidence, screenshots, voice messages, records of my fear. Her voice never wavered. When Jessica's turn came, she tried to shift the blame. She claimed she had followed my mother's instructions out of fear, that she didn't know the fire was real, that she never intended to hurt me. Her attorney painted her as another victim of a controlling parent. but under cross-examination, her story began to crack. She admitted to locking the door. She admitted to hearing me scream. She admitted to walking away. Then the prosecutor asked, "Did you try to help her? Did you even dial 911?" Jessica hesitated. "No," she said, "I didn't." My mother's defense was worse. She insisted I was delusional, that I had a long history of fabricating things for attention. She said the fire was a tragic accident, that I had started it in a manic episode. Julia presented medical reports showing no history of mania, no psychosis. Nothing but years of unexplained prescriptions, most of them written by a family doctor who later admitted under oath he had signed forms given by my mother without ever meeting me. He said I trusted her. I shouldn't have. When it was my turn to take the stand, the room went still. I sat tall, shoulders back, hands folded in front of me. My voice shook at first, but I kept going. I told them everything. About the way I grew up being told I was the problem, about the pills, about the silence, about how I wasn't allowed to think for myself. I described the night of the fire in slow, painful detail. How I smelled the smoke, how the door wouldn't open, how I heard them laugh, how I begged, how I knew finally undeniably that they wanted me gone. The defense attorney tried to rattle me. He asked if I had ever exaggerated before, if I had ever been treated for anxiety, if I thought maybe the trauma had altered my memory. I looked him in the eye and said, "I remember everything. I remember the click of the lock. I remember the silence. I remember that they never tried to save me. And I remember surviving." The final blow came when Julia read an excerpt from one of my mother's old journals recovered from a fireproof safe. In it, she wrote, "If she won't learn her place, maybe she doesn't deserve one in this house." The courtroom fell silent. No further explanation was needed. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. They found both my mother and Jessica guilty on all charges: attempted murder, false imprisonment, reckless endangerment, and abuse. The judge sentenced my mother to 40 years without parole. Jessica received 20 with a possibility of parole after 10. Before they were taken away, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood slowly, my knees trembling, but my voice strong. For years, I thought I was the broken one. I thought I needed fixing, controlling, medicating. But the truth is, I was never the problem. I was just inconvenient to your narrative. Today, I'm no longer a shadow in your house. I'm a survivor standing in the light. My mother didn't look at me. Jessica cried. I didn't. As they were led away, I felt something lift a weight I had carried since I was a child. That day, I didn't just win a trial. I reclaimed my story, and I would never let them write another word of it again. It's been 5 years since the trial, and every morning I wake up to quiet, not the eerie kind that used to follow my mother's punishments, but the kind that feels like a clean slate. I live in Portland now in a small apartment above a bookstore that smells like ink and cinnamon. The windows creak when it rains, and I keep them wide open anyway. I still check the locks sometimes. Still pause at the sound of footsteps in the hallway, but the panic fades quicker now. My therapist says healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering safely. She's right. I remember everything. I remember being the girl who was told she was unlovable, who was drugged into silence, who was locked in a room while the walls filled with smoke. But I also remember being the girl who called 911 anyway, who built a life from scraps, who stood in a courtroom and told the truth. I graduated last spring with a degree in digital media and a minor in trauma psychology. I gave my final thesis on narrative reclamation, how survivors use storytelling to take back power. I told my professor that some stories aren't just therapy, they're resistance. Now I work part-time at a nonprofit helping young adults escape abusive homes. I design materials, manage social outreach, and sometimes just sit across from someone who's been told their whole life they don't matter and tell them they do. Last month, one of the girls I mentored asked if I'd ever been through anything like what she described. I hesitated for a second. Then I said yes. I survived it. She blinked at me and whispered, "You don't look like someone who's been through hell." I smiled. That's the point. I changed my name legally last year, dropped the last name that bound me to them. I chose Rayner in honor of Detective Rayner, the man who listened to my story without judgment, the man who showed me what it looked like when someone in authority chooses compassion. My mother and Jessica both tried to reach out from prison. Letters. Messages through third parties. Jessica apologized again. My mother didn't. I returned every letter unopened. Some people think forgiveness is necessary for peace. I disagree. My peace isn't tied to their remorse. It's built on the fact that I walked away, that I lived, that I built something better. Maya is still in my life. We talk weekly. She visited me last Christmas and we spent the morning painting mugs in mismatched pajamas like we used to dream of doing. She was the first person who ever told me my voice mattered, and now I make sure others hear the same thing. I kept the sketchbook from high school, the one filled with drawings of cages and broken glass. It sits on my shelf next to my college diploma. I used to look at it and feel pain. Now I look at it and feel pride. I survived that. I outgrew it. I dismantled every lie they built to control me. I don't tell many people the whole story, not unless it's necessary. But I write, sometimes anonymously, sometimes not. Essays, blogs, a memoir I'm working on. One day it might help someone else escape before they get burned. Sometimes I walk past a fire station and pause. The smell of smoke doesn't trigger me the way it used to. It reminds me of the day the lie collapsed, the day the truth came rushing in like air through a shattered window. That day I didn't just survive. I became someone else. Not Caitlin the problem, not Caitlin the patient. Caitlin Rayner, survivor, creator, advocate. A woman who wakes up every day in a home of her own making. A woman who knows the sound of her own voice and refuses to silence it. They tried to erase me, but I carved myself into the world with fire-hardened hands and a name I chose. And this time, I'm not going anywhere.